McConnell was here in the morning, I heard, a little early. Okay. I want to thank Senators Gillibrand, Coons, Cortez Masto, and Kelly for joining me today. Now, as you know, last week Congress passed legislation averting a catastrophic default, all while preserving the most important and consequential investments we've made through legislation like the CHIPS and Science Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. Now money is going into these communities and revolutionizing towns throughout the country. This means critical investments for our communities, and that means jobs, 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 jobs across America. And as we enter the wildfire season here in the U.S., and while New York State and the East Coast are engulfed in smoke from wildfires in Canada, we are reminded that the climate crisis is real and it is here. And that's why we're taking action. The Biden administration is getting out $7 billion in funding to fight wildfires from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. That's a historic investment in building our firefighter workforce and purchasing new technology to beat back fires. And those investments are critical for our future. But it's vital that we do what we can to protect vulnerable communities from the smoke already in the air. Legislation passed like the American Rescue Plan delivered funds for schools to upgrade their air infiltration and purification systems, so important on days like today. There'll be schools that have cleaner air in them in the Northeast because of the legislation we passed and the dollars that were implemented. But it's not just the investments to make our country safer and improve our communities, but also the jobs we're creating. Democrats have created more than 13 million jobs, 13 million, and more are on the way. The historic bills we passed have dramatic impact in two areas. Not only are we addressing the major threats to our nation, like climate change and Chinese government interference, but we're creating millions of jobs and spurring billions in private investment. Thanks to President Biden and congressional Democrats, 32,000 infrastructure projects, $470 billion in private sector funding is flowing to states across the whole nation, including $214 billion in investment towards semiconductors, which was largely made possible thanks to the CHIPS and Science Act. More than $200 billion to help make America the leader in clean energy manufacturing, led by legislation like the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. And these investments include everything from new battery plants in Georgia and West Virginia, to solar facilities in Oklahoma and South Carolina, to new wind turbine assembly lines in New York, and so much more. These are just a few examples of how Democrats' agenda is paving the way for jobs for the future. A huge number, 13 million. Compare that to previous administrations, particularly the last one. Implementation will remain at the top of Democratic priorities. We're spending lots of time making sure all the great legislation we passed and got signed into law is now implemented properly, and we're having a great deal of success with it. And it's going to remain our priority in the years ahead. Democrats have a great story to tell the American people, and now we're putting in the work to make sure that people know precisely how our agenda will work for them. And now my good friend and partner in New York, Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Senator Schumer. First of all, I want to thank Senator Schumer for his dogged leadership, his vision, especially during the most recent debt ceiling negotiations. Senator Schumer has continued to deliver when it matters most, not just for New York, but for the whole country. And make no mistake, where this place started with Speaker McCarthy's jobs killer bill to where it ended really made the difference. The fight wasn't easy, but we defeated McCarthy's bill and preserved the core of the Democratic agenda, the job creation agenda. The American people sent us here to fight for them, to help build a better future for their families. And that's what we've been doing and fighting for since day one, to grow our economy, create jobs, and bring opportunities and revitalization to all communities. Thanks to President Biden's leadership, New York has already received billions of dollars in funding to create jobs, invest in domestic manufacturing, and rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. The CHIPS and Science Act brought massive investments to New York's semiconductor manufacturing industry and encouraged private companies to invest billions of dollars into a 21st century economy and industry. Following its passage, Micron announced plans to build a $100 billion mega complex of chip plants near Syracuse. Our state also received increased funding to rebuild our infrastructure. Senator Schumer and I were just in Buffalo with Secretary Buttigieg and Governor Hochul to announce $55 million in funding to construct a new highway, cap and tunnel over the Kensington Expressway, the construction of which originally divided the Buffalo community, displacing residents and cutting workers and businesses off from the local economy. That $55 million will help reconnect divided communities, provide residents with greater access to green space, amenities, and jobs. Most importantly, this funding will create more jobs. I'm very grateful that key provisions from my Build Local, Hire Local bill was added to the bipartisan infrastructure law. It encourages state and local governments to hire local workers to do this work. It can right the wrongs of the past. It can benefit those who need the most help. And when we train and hire local workers, we create an entire generation of people trained to build and maintain our infrastructure moving forward. We create better opportunities for generational wealth building in underserved communities. And we lay the foundation for a stronger workforce in the future. Since its passage, the Biden administration has awarded over $220 billion in funding in the bipartisan infrastructure law, aimed at repairing roads and bridges, delivering clean water, deploying high-speed internet, rural broadband, and building clean energy transportation infrastructure. Roads, bridges, jobs, that is the Democratic agenda.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. Next we have Senator Coons.
Thank you, Leader Schumer, and thank you for your focus on the importance of manufacturing for the American economy. As you've heard from my two colleagues, Senators Gillibrand and Schumer, New York is experiencing a renaissance of investment in manufacturing on the ground in New York. So too is Delaware and dozens of other states across our country. Most Americans maybe have heard the acronyms and the large dollar numbers, the BIF, the IRA, the CHIPS and Science Act, the tens of billions of dollars, but they are now beginning to feel it and see it on the ground, with not just announcements but groundbreakings, the beginning of construction of new advanced manufacturing plants. Yes, in the semiconductor chip industry, but in a dozen other industries as we finance the transition to a clean energy economy and as we create high-quality jobs across our country. In the first 2 years of the Biden administration, the private sector has created more high-skill, high-wage jobs and in particular seen a faster growth in manufacturing than in any other administration in decades. As someone who spent 8 years in the private sector in a manufacturing business that had sites in 5 different states, I've seen it. The difference that a high-wage manufacturing job makes for a family and for the surrounding community. We've seen big announcements, and we are beginning to see big changes in communities. I'll mention just a few. $5 billion for a semiconductor plant announced in Silver City, North Carolina. $3.5 billion in New Mexico for the Rio Rancho plant. And in my small state of Delaware, $50 million was just announced by the DuPont company to upgrade a plant in Glasgow that provides inputs into the semiconductor business. Why does this matter? Because this is an example not of federal investment, but of the private sector mirroring and then amplifying federal investment. All told, businesses are investing over $200 billion in semiconductors, $130 billion in EVs and batteries. These are plants and jobs that wouldn't be there without our legislation and our work. China is making massive investments in their manufacturing capacity, in their competitiveness with us. Finally, in the last 2 years, because of the leadership of this caucus, of Senator Schumer, and of the Biden administration, we are not just catching up, we are leading the world in new investment in the transition to a clean energy economy. Thank you.
Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Thank you, Leader Schumer, for bringing us together here and for leading us through the negotiations to avoid default and save. thousands of clean energy jobs in Nevada and millions across the country. We know that far-right Republicans threatened our economy and tried to hold our working families hostage, plain and simple, but we refused to allow it. The far-right's plan was to gut the Inflation Reduction Act and kill our clean energy economy and the millions of good-paying jobs that go with it. Now that we have defeated their efforts and avoided default, we can continue to focus on implementing that law and supporting our working families. Nevada is at the forefront of the clean energy economy, leading in solar, geothermal, and battery manufacturing. There are thousands of Nevadans in Las Vegas who install panels in our solar fields. I've seen them firsthand. I've visited and spent time with our IBEW at Gemini Solar Project, one of the new solar arrays in southern Nevada. These are good-paying jobs. These are union jobs. If we are going to keep building out the infrastructure for electric vehicles, we are also going to need lithium. And Nevada has enough lithium to power the world, the whole world, for the next 85 years. We are at the nexus of this clean energy economy, and we have the ecosystem to make it happen, not just in Nevada, but in this country, which will create great paying jobs for so many Americans across the country. That's why it was important for me and my colleagues to work to make sure this bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act invested not only in our critical mineral supply chain, but it also gave Nevada companies the opportunity to engage and start manufacturing and recycling the batteries that we need to power this clean energy future. Companies like Redwood Materials, American Battery Technology Company, and Lilac Solutions that are in Nevada and are creating almost 2,000 jobs for my state. Taken together, in my state, there are tens of thousands of families who depend on these clean energy jobs, and I'm proud that our party, we stuck together to protect them when we know that there were extreme Republicans who are willing to take away those jobs and those opportunities for working families. The legislation that we just passed kept our economy afloat and reinforced that we stand for American jobs, our clean energy future, and our working families. And finally, let me just say, what you are seeing happen on the East Coast with the weather conditions because of the fire, we see it quite often, unfortunately, in the West. This has become our norm. And it was important for all of us to fight in that bipartisan infrastructure package for that $8 billion. It is now being implemented in this country to address the wildfires that we see in the United States. We need to do more to address the prevention piece of it, the suppression, utilize the technology that's out there like wild alert cameras that we use in the West, as well as the remediation now when their fire has occurred in so many of our states. This is what's happening, and it's because the Democrats came together to really support long-term, not just overnight, but long-term funding to address these issues in the infrastructure package. I am proud the Democrats, and working with them, we were able to deliver for our working families in this country. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cortez Masto. Last but not least, Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Leader Schumer. Thanks for bringing us together here. Over the past couple years, we've seen some big and real impacts to our country, but also in Arizona, where the legislation we passed has had a really big impact. We've got a drought going on in the West. It's been going on now for 20 years. It's the biggest drought that this part of the planet, the worst drought that we have seen, that we know about for over 1,000 years. And the challenges that the West has faced because of this are great. Colorado River supplies 40 million people with water. It also helps grow a large portion of our food supply. Now, we worked to get the funding into the Inflation Reduction Act for water conservation, significant funding. And we also work closely with states and the Bureau of Reclamation. And I want to highlight a couple individuals here that were so critical to helping us address this problem, and that's Commissioner Camille Touton from the Bureau of Reclamation and Deputy Secretary Tommy Boudreau of the Department of Interior. They helped us maximize the resources that we put in the legislation. And this has already paid off. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, the lower Colorado River Basin states announced a proposal that's going to conserve 3 million acre-feet of water over a 3-year period. Now, that was only made possible by this legislation, and it goes a long way to helping us address this problem. Now, I imagine folks would also expect me to talk about chips, which I often do. Semiconductor chips is a big deal in the state of Arizona, but I want to highlight another industry that's growing in Arizona because of legislation. A couple of weeks ago, I visited a company called Li-Cycle. Secretary Granholm came with me. It's in Gilbert, Arizona, and it's also addressing the need for lithium. Now, Senator Cortez Masto mentioned that the state of Nevada has a lot of lithium. The other place we have a lot of lithium is in batteries already. And what this company does is they chop up existing batteries, car batteries, cell phone batteries, laptop batteries, storage batteries. And they extract the lithium, the cobalt, the copper. And these are the things that really strengthen our domestic supply chain and helps us reduce our reliance on foreign-sourced critical minerals, minerals that often come from China. Now, this company has received a loan from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to build a facility that is going to help us meet a lot of our needs. It's a big win for our country. But in the state of Arizona, in addition to chips, we're seeing a growing number of battery manufacturers coming to our state. LG, Core Power, American Battery Factory Company, Heritage Battery Recycling, they are all choosing to build facilities and expand in the state of Arizona. So we're going to keep working on this. I mean, we've got tremendous opportunities over the last couple years. That's going to continue in the future, and we're going to continue to work to make sure that we solve some of these climate issues, but at the same time address our energy needs and our supply chain vulnerabilities from getting critical items from across an ocean. Thank you.
Thank you. And as you can see, our caucus is making a very, very strong and I think successful effort to let the American people know all the good things that we've done and how they're affecting them on the ground. Yes.
Thank you, Leader Schumer. 2 questions, one for you and the second for you.
One question. Pick one.
What is your reaction to the merger between the PGA Tour and LIV Golf, the latter which is funded by the Saudis?
Well, look, I leave it up to the professionals there to figure out what's best for golf. Yes.
Do you still plan on bringing a resolution to the floor condemning the defunding of DOJ and FBI? What's the timing on that? And do you think House Republicans are still serious about doing that defunding their law enforcement?
Well, if you've seen the kind of votes that have been taken, we have shown as a Democratic caucus how strongly we feel about funding the police. And you've also seen the Republicans have made it clear in many of their proposals that they want to decrease that funding. So we think they've made it very clear. In their original bill, they cut law enforcement funding by a tremendous amount in the House bill. Look, she's a great nominee, and we're going to do everything we can to help her get confirmed. Yes.
There are several vacancies for the Joint Chiefs coming up at General Brown, of course. Assuming Senator Tuberville does not release his hold, are you going to schedule for time?
Look, I think what Senator Tuberville has done is just awful. We believe that Republican senators, if they care about national security, should be putting pressure on him to release those holds. What he's doing is very damaging to our security. Yes, next.
Do you have a plan B, though, if Republican senators put pressure on him? Do you plan to bring any of those nominations to the floor?
Bottom line is that this is a disgrace, what he is doing. It's risking our national security, and it's up to the Republican caucus to reject what he has done. Yes. I haven't seen too much discussion of that. Obviously, good trade between two friendly nations like the United States and UK is very important. Yes.
Will Julie Sue get a vote on the Senate floor?
We are working very, very hard to get Julie Sue confirmed. Yes, last one. His cloture vote was pulled because we didn't have full attendance, but we're going to move to get him passed.
Are you going to bring any gun
Okay?
legislation?
Thank you.